India may have not historically the concept of the unbuilt as we know it through from Europe. Kind of abstraction of something that is still, fed by history, fed by built environment. Like Piranesi, I'm very sure Piranesi must have got inspired by what was around him. While I thought when we were talking on phone, you said symbols. And I immediately thought certainly of Indian yantras as a possibility of a seed for that can happen thereafter. Like in a plant, more organic, though through the understanding of maybe the cosmos, but more organically, just a little direction. Because it's a vast topic, and I think Ashish is looking for something else today.
Not something. No, I was not. You see, you're talking from the point of view of a practicing architect.
Yes.
Somebody who makes buildings.
Yes.
Okay. But my concern is with the fact that there is no architecture in this country being practiced in the way that architecture is understood in Europe, in the English language, and the European society, which is the sort of preeminent society in the Western world, in the industrialized world, in the, let's say, which has the hegemony in terms of thought in the world, actually.
Yeah.
Nobody pays any attention to what Indian people are thinking, or what the Brazilians are thinking, for that matter, or what the Africans are considered to be, some inferior race, actually, which is absurd. So this hegemony of thought, which the Europeans have very carefully nursed for 500 years, and it's very real. And I struggle against that because, as you know, I was educated there and I learned architecture there, really. In any case, what we were learning here, when I started learning architecture in IIT Kharagpur, it was all that. It was a second-hand version of what you can get from the West. So I went there, I learned there. Then when I came back, then I was teaching at the SP. I went to the SP and this, that, and all that. And I said, there is no architecture here. And that feeling has only grown over these 55 years since I've come back and have been practicing here. You see? Because what you don't have here is actually a value frame for architecture. You have construction and you have appearance. Both these things in plenty. But architecture is more than construction and appearance. So where is that? Now architects, by default, not by training, and actually most Indian architects who are doing well have gone and done higher education abroad.
Yes, indeed.
You see, there are very few architects you'll find. There are, in Ayanagar there are. If you come down this drive, you will find lots of houses which are all very ethnic in character. One house you will find which is rather like DLF. We call it the DLF house.
At the entrance?
No, not at the end. The entrance is a piece of eccentricity. It's an artistic eccentricity, which I'd call something else. It's also quite ethnic, but in a very different way. But in the middle somewhere, it's fortunately quite hidden by large trees. But if you will not even look at it twice, perhaps, because you look at something else.
Somehow the road, or the form of the road, or the shape, is such that it pulls your eyes towards the left side.
Yeah, because it turns left.
Yeah, it's a gentle turn.
Yeah, and you always come here.
Yeah.
So that is in the middle. You drive by it. It's in the straight bit, and that is a house which is like something built in DLF. Like many houses are built in DLF. And in fact, to me, it also represents the kind of buildings that people like morphogenesis and all do. It's all straight lines, planes, rectangle, completely rectilinear. It's a kind of, what you might say, a bad version, a dilution, a corruption of de style.
Yeah, actually very true. Most of the DLF buildings, and the northern part, I would say, of India, I don't know, spreading of course, is the steel.
Everywhere.
The vertical and horizontal in variety of compositions.
Straight planes,
Yeah.
right angles, and solid void.
Yes.
You know, a kind of voids and solids, and but it's not a steel. The steel was an art movement which had very deep roots in Dutch culture.
Yeah.
I mean, I have seen a house by, anyway, I won't go into that because I've got too many stories to tell. One of the problems, if you want to talk to me or anyway, is that I've reached the age of dotage, it's called. So I'm full of anecdotes. It's called dotage. When you get old, that age is called dotage. You're always telling anecdotes. What happened in 1982 or what happened in 1962, all that kind of stuff. So it takes a long time, and I tell stories all the time, which are very convoluted.
Therefore, he was surprised, as you said, 1.5 hours. I think the 1,000 words didn't bother him so much.
But you see, I've been wrestling for unbuilt. To me, let me come to the focus. Represents an idea about architecture. Obviously, I mean, to be rather straightforward about it, unbuilt means it's an idea about architecture. It's not a building. It's an idea about architecture. So now, idea about architecture will only happen if there is architecture. And I've been wrestling with this notion, what is the architecture which is being practiced in this country for 50 odd years? Because I started in 67 when Jhabwala hired me to come and teach at the SPA. So then I got into a community of young architects who were teaching at the SPA. And from that time onwards, I've taught at the SPA and other places and all that. And I'm surprised at the fact that what is being taught as architecture in the country is certainly not architecture. It's about construction, it's about appearance, but it's not about architecture. And what is missing is the symbolic content. You see, before you make a construction or before you make architecture of any kind, you have to have an idea, no? Some idea you work from. It's not an idea about just construction, how you construct it.
Yeah, of course not.
Or how it's going to appear.
Yeah, yes.
Finally, when it's done, it's going to be an image.
Yeah.
It's going to appear like something. Image means, image is a carefully one has to use the term, because image can mean many things. A poet uses imagery, isn't it? The thing that distinguishes a poetry from prose is because poetry is rich with imagery.
It's describing set of images, right?
Well, it's
descriptive.
Descriptive. Prose is also descriptive. The image is something which actually has to do with something which comes from your back of your mind, from your unconscious or your subconscious, not only from the conscious mind. The conscious mind reacts to a retinal impulse.
Yeah.
What you're seeing, it's only recorded in your retina. It's not something which is part of your memory. The mind works with it, with memory, and then gives it meaning and gives it emotion, gives it mood. You see, in our classical music, which is so rich, I mean, the richest tradition we have is of music and performing arts. And there's a reason for it. Because if you, our understanding of the cosmic evolution is that at first there was nothing. Then there was what they call the unstruck sound. And then there's the original sound, which is best described as Om. From that appears, from the first sound appears Roop.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And from Roop appears form, other things, all the kinds of sensations. So you do, and So from sound is first, and sound actually breaks into raga and raginis. We play with sound, we make raga and ragini out of it. And those are actually dependent on our moods. What raga and ragini depicts is our moods. Now, if you take that same analogy to architecture, it's similar, the idea is the same. The idea is it's a human construct.
Yeah.
Whether the expression is in music or the expression is in what you might say, the geometric arts or something like that, the idea will be like that. It'll develop in the same manner, and we don't have this. In architects are not able to describe moods in their work. Can you say of your work that this is like, you say rag malkaun se ye to, and you can only play it in the evening.
Yes.
Or if it.
Yeah, but that is for the musician or for the piece of music, certainly it is more a grammar, prescriptive grammar, that certain things are played in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. Now, architecture can't naturally.
It's not a prescriptive grammar.
No. It's an emotion, you are saying. But the emotion has gained a certain vocabulary.
The vocabulary is there,
Yeah.
but it's not prescriptive. It
It's the
actually.
musician. The musician has little freedom to play that. A kind of interpretation.
The whole of classical Indian music
Yeah.
is all interpretation.
Yeah, but it.
I mean, it's one rag.
Yeah.
It'll have a kind of structure,
Yeah.
melody, and then there's a melody,
Yeah.
and after that the musician just goes away with it. He does what they want. They make all
So it
kinds.
will not happen that two different musicians play the same rag in a very similar way.
No, there is a jugalbandi. Even in the jugalbandi, if two people are playing,
Yeah.
they are doing different interpretations and challenging the other guy. Okay, now you do my type of interpretation, or give me a foil to that. That game which is played.
Yeah.
You see? So, but anyway, music is of course based on time and it's
Yeah.
it's transitory thing, whereas architecture has to do with built stuff,
Yeah.
which lasts for generations,
Yeah.
very often beyond a human lifetime,
Yeah.
and it stays for a long time. So even if it doesn't stay for a long time, it's something which you inhabit, which is very different from something that you perceive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now that the value of inhabitation is what will become which will give value to the architecture. When I say there is, you have to actually go to the value, there must be some value in it. It's not just an assembly of materials.
Certainly not.
That's engineering.
But when you design, certainly, say practically, if you approach a studio work, say, or yourself, your idea is certainly driven, if you're doing a home for somebody or a house, driven by how you see certain spaces, or you call it very often places now, places for a certain activity.
Mhm.
Certainly the activities are not always defined. You enrich the activities, like in case of the musician, if there's a certain rag, so say the dining space in your house, for example, and I was contemplating about it, why I find your house amazing, amazingly rich, because it has a underlying structure, say a conceptual structure, but it breaks that also at places.
Mhm.
If I see your relationship between your mom's room, the sitting area, your rather formal area, say, and the dining, it's very fluid. That way it is very modern. It is driven by idea that these three spaces are specific, yet they are not specific. That means they enrich themselves with certain unpredictable quality of usage. You have let that happen, which is very modern, which is not even the vernacular, which is not even the traditional, because historically certain spaces were defined for a certain purpose. And I think you have broken that from and I would say that is what the heritage is. You take something, you modify it to what you suddenly discover as an architect, as a person who reflects about his need and takes it further to arranging newly that very structure that you may have got inspired by. See, your structure is very strongly inspired by Khan's serving and served spaces. That's how I understood as I saw you. And interestingly, I can't see that. And I feel that very strongly about your architecture. That the diagram, which is the idea, the seed, the idea seems to be very clear. But once you make something, the idea hides away. It dissipates. And what comes is the life. And I think that transition is remarkable about your work. And I felt that also with earlier. I remember having mentioned that at the IID a few years back, where I showed the diagram of, I think this one, probably, the diagram for your mother and child, care center in Bengal. And I felt that you are very clear. It doesn't take you much time. It's like a lightning that happens within you, that you get a concept, but thereafter you craft actually the spaces. You actually deconstruct, you destroy actually your concept. You make it and then you destroy it. Because you dissolve it. And I think that is the magician's hand in a way.
Well, you know what you're pointing to is a very important fact of facet, if you like, of the architectural project, which is that, and whether you build it or don't build it, the project I'm talking about, it's an architectural projection, really. That the architectural projection has it gets its power, as it were, from the transition of what you call a concept or an idea about the life as it is, a general idea about life. And then you have to build it. So that transition of creating from the idea into a building, that is an extremely valuable, and that's the key to producing good architecture, I believe. Because it is in that you invest all architecture. Anything that's been built before, which you know about, is then brought to bear on that transition, so that this idea then translates into something which can be built. So the building that emerges finally has got so many different memories in it. And at its best, it would have the memories of all architecture that you know about.
Yes.
You know?
Indeed.
So in that sense, you're saying it's not deconstructing or destroying the idea, it is enriching the idea.
Yeah.
But it's really taking the idea into, giving it life. You know, the idea itself is given life by that means,
Actually,
by
Ashish,
making it buildable.
you know why I'm saying it's a destroying the idea? I'm reflecting upon the conventional split between the unbuilt and the built. The general idea notion is that the unbuilt is an ideal case because the architect has produced it in a way for him or herself, while the built...
It's a work of pure imagination.
Yes, it's a pure imagination. It could not be necessarily whimsical, but it has a certain purity, yes. That's very important for the architect. If you look at an object, and I think it even expands into urban design, like we see it with The Radiant City by Corbusier. It's his imagination how people in future should live. Now, and that split I feel is very strong in the European context. Worshipping that the unbuilt is puristic, but once it translates into something which then, as you're rightly saying, is inhabited and has life to it, that it loses the purity because it gets diluted from that purity, which is a fallacy. In fact, that part is very interesting as a new focus for the unbuilt versus the built. It feels a bit when I look at the building, at the book, where you have unbuilt and built, that people get very excited about the unbuilt because you can, like a honeybee, take the nectar out of it and then procreate, while the built seems to lose it. I feel there's a distinction with your building, especially with this building, gets questioned because it enriches, like you are rightly saying. In fact, it makes it compulsive or compulsory that the concept has to dissolve itself from its rigidity and purity to become life. And I feel that's a very organic way of seeing your architecture. Very organic and very life responding way. Because it can generate actually another principle of order. If I look at your house, I would pick it up, suddenly it can branch in many more possibilities. Without that, the structure is jeopardized. Without that, you have to depict this structure only. I can, after studying your house here, I could probably create another structural arrangement, another idea out of it, which then springs into or enriches into another life form. And I think it is an architecture that can procreate easily, while architecture that cuts away this possibility, this synthesis between unbuilt and built, doesn't allow it. I think that very strongly. I think the modernists created so many sketches, especially during the 60s, I think it's full of it. And Europe has that tradition. I remember Schinkel, the Prussian kings. Schinkel produced so many drawings, and other competitors of that time of 19th century for the kings and all would produce one drawing, one scheme after other. And what made the scheme mostly unbuildable probably were the scale, and what made them attractive also. I feel architects get overwhelmed by the scale when something is huge and something seems to be impossible. So the more impossible, you call it iconic, no? The more impossible certain things get into, the more attraction or seductive power it has for architects. Which is counter to that, what you are practicing, I feel.
Yeah.
You are just seeing the whole thing turning around at the possibility of giving life to things and not. Therefore, for you, in my opinion, and it counts in a different way for me also, a piece of building that we attempt or a drawing that we make or an idea that we get is not for the idea purpose. It's not in the thin air or a bubble that we create. It's always driven by or it's always fed by life, and it is meant for life, enhancing. In your case, of course, more obvious. In my case, it could be questioned because I come with what you say very often, and I think rightly. It is, you stayed only 15 years in England.
Less
Than that.
10, maybe 10 years.
10.
In all,
I
9 years.
doubled it and more at a very fragile
much
age.
younger
age. So it has impacted this Western ideology of splitting things and then looking very narrowly, rather in a holistic way. It's certainly what differentiates us very strongly. Which you rightly said. Therefore, you think that there is no architecture practiced here in India, because it is an extension, a kind of half-bred extension of the European thought, that you can split things. I think so.
Architecture which is practiced here, I'm actually sort of really carefully now trying to understand that, because there is something practiced here, and I mean there's so much building done.
One part you covered already, the steel, in different variations.
But that, you see, that is only for the middle classes. That's very small, urban middle class kind of clientele. If you look at the vast majority of the country, which is in the rural areas, and still in the rural areas, or they are now people who are in transit between the urban and rural centers, because there's a huge amount of that happening. Huge chunks of our population, as we saw when lockdown happened, I mean, how many hundreds of thousands of people started walking home? Extraordinary, huh? Nobody could have believed that this hidden dimension of Delhi's life was real, you know. Anyway, and now, if you see the farmers, how many farmers have gathered on the roads? We are not allowed to see them because the media is blanking it all out. But a little bit of social media, you get some impression of it. And after Red Fort, after 26, they're even blanking out the social media. I don't know what they're doing, how they can have exercise so much control. But just the idea, there are hundreds and thousands of farmers camped on the outskirts of Delhi.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful idea. And this to me speaks of real India. Not the India that just yesterday, I'm going to take a diversion from what I was saying, but you must remind me to get back to the idea of what kind of architecture is India producing. We'll have to get back to that, because that's really what is unbuilt, or what is not understood by the profession as built.
Yeah.
Okay, the profession is building.
Yeah.
The profession recognizes itself, it stands on the platform of building, which is why Rajesh is so tentative about the term unbuilt. And publishers are denying him that unbuilt has any meaning. Anybody has any will understand it or have something to do with it or buy the book, etc. Because everything is standing on the platform of built. Okay, but architecture is not built. Architecture is much more than that. Much more, not less. People would think unbuilt is less. No, it's much more. So I'll come back to that idea of how can we understand or appreciate what is the real architecture of India. However, I'll get back to the story. Yesterday I was sent an article by Ranjit Sabiki. Sabiki is one of our senior most architects alive today. One of them. I mean, Raj Rewal is the same age, Ram Sharma is the same age, but Ranjit is actually writing regularly. He's writing articles. And just yesterday he sent me, which I couldn't open it, I read it today. He was writing against two articles which appeared in the Hindustan Times. One by Amitabh Kant, the head of CEO or whatever of Niti Aayog, and one by Sanjeev Sanyal, who is a principal economic advisor or some economic advisor to the Niti Aayog. Now, what Kant is writing about is about how in the last few years this government has modernized India, and what a great benefit to India, to the people of this country have received by the modernization processes, largely driven by high technology and things like that. Then Sanyal is writing about the Central Vista project, how essential it is and how wonderful it is that we are doing that project, and how it is essential that the Indian people also get the benefits of this iconic buildings in the central, etc. It's complete and utter rubbish. That's what I'm saying. Now, if I say that it's about rubbish about a certain article, nobody will take any notice of it. Ranjit has written a wonderful, very rational, very cool, well-argued diatribe against both these articles. I'll send it to you, I'll share it with you, because he's very keen to share it with others. And it's just that, so just reading that, and his main point is to these two gentlemen, that they're sitting in positions of great power, that they have no understanding about the reality of this country. Simple point. And it's absolutely undeniable. It cannot be refuted. It's an irrefutable argument. Both these gentlemen are writing from a point of view which is totally denying the reality of India. God knows where their heads are, but we best not to think about that. So this is what's going on. So I'm now going back to the point that there is a reality of architecture in this country. It will emerge from understanding and looking carefully at the building which is being done. The seed of the idea will be in the building that is being done. Now, a lot of it, but unfortunately what's happening is that most of the building that is being done is that we know, we see, is in the urban areas, on the margins. What the poor are doing is working on the margins of the cities. Mid-city, they can't do it. Mid-city, it's architects, like not me anymore, but it's people like you are doing, or your proteges are doing, the important modern buildings that are coming up in our cities, they are building those. Now, but that's a few buildings. How many are there? I mean, the majority, the bulk of the building which is happening is being done by ordinary people.
Yeah.
You know, and in that, as you know, I've been trying to understand what exactly is it that these ordinary people are building, because I live there where ordinary people have built their own city, and this is the point I'm constantly making to people. There is, I'm trying to still understand what is the architectural idea behind it. You see, I'm using the term architecture in the same way as you use information architecture, okay? That it is a set of relationships between discrete entities that is assembled and made into a pattern or a series of patterns or a system. That's architecture. It can happen with information, it can happen with construction, building construction, it can happen with the policies of a country. You know, you can say that this person was the architect of the nation. Jawaharlal Nehru ke baare mein kisi ne kaha tha shayad some years ago, you know, and or Gandhi or somebody like that. Some very powerful thought leader of a country can be the architect of that nation, because he's putting together, he's assembling, like we do with buildings. We assemble parts of the building to make us to express a series of relationships of habitation of people's requirements into a structure which then has some tangible physical form and has a geometry, because you know, without the geometry you can't make it stand very often, etc. So all that is not really so I'm looking at architecture from that point of view, that what is architecture which is with what you call the seed. Where is the seed of the thing? The architecture is the seed. You see, when I had to, you remember, you were there, when I had to write my a paper on what was called challenges of architecture. In '91, you were there? No, you had left. You were not in the office at that time.
91.
Not in 91. I was invited to go with a delegation of Indian government people to go to Berlin to represent the Festival of India in a seminar on the challenges of urbanization, or about urbanization. And there were 6 people in the delegation: Mahesh Buch, Ashish Bose, Cyrus Gazdar, 1 or 2 or 3 others, this one from Pune, I forget, myself. So, and I was asked to write about the challenges of architecture within this whole thing. So I wrote that, and I sat for a long time thinking, how do I represent architecture? How do I describe it? And at that time, I drew this triple axis. You've seen my triple axis?
Yeah, in your discovery of architecture.
So the triple axis is very simply, the discovery is much later. That discovery comes in 2013. But I used the triple axis. I thought about it in '91 when I was, before going on this seminar, when I wrote that piece, that it is in fact, the architecture happens at the junction of geography, history and philosophy. Okay. When these 3 come together, that's when architecture emerges. I mean, history you can look at. I represent history by Brihadeshwar temple, a drawing of that. I represent geography as this wonderful diversity of environmental types that we have on this subcontinent, from deserts to mountains to huge river basins, to the Deccan Plateau, to the rainforests, to the islands, to the coastal areas. There are 7 types, environmental types, which exist within almost walking distance of each other. You know, at least one night's walk, you can get there from high desert to a river basin, you know, etc. So these things are, this incredible diversity is the geography which feeds the architecture. And then philosophy. Without these extraordinary constructs of Advait, Vedanta, Buddhism, Jainism, and Christianity and Islam, which we have taken into our fold, you know, without that, again, architecture would not have any life. So unless you have all 3 together, then you have architecture. But that's not construction.
But you know, this is probably, that's what I see, the formal sector of architecture. Formal, I talk about people who engage at professional level After all the temples that were made in this country across from north to south, they were made not only by craftsmen, they were made by thinkers. Because it's at the, as you're rightly saying, at the crossroads of all these three vectors. But what about architecture? I was recently little off from Manali into the smaller villages, and villages that may have a population of 200 people, maybe little more, small villages, and there are many of them across this country.
Yeah.
And what I saw there is the concern is certainly not architecture, temple, formal architecture. Their concern is more, how do you make buildings that historically they have inherited, their legacy, which was certainly very expressive, very refined, a lot of carving, a lot of craftsmanship, even in the individual buildings, and very clear understanding of spaces that they needed. Now, the generation that has inherited that finds it very difficult to maintain these buildings. Even historical buildings are unlike what we very often may think. They have of course lived out also their time, but they are very heavy on maintenance and expensive on their maintenance. So the villages that are a little more careful about their heritage, without of course any architects, just their craftsmen and people doing their own repair work, they are borrowing from the market. They are borrowing certain items from the market which increase the life of their new construction without completely surrendering the legacy. So they are carrying forward certain elements of the past, and which I was very glad to see, but adding certain materials that hopefully live longer for them, because they don't know that. They're also very friendly towards experimentation, and partly also because people must be selling the idea. Though they are very seclusive villages. They are very, they don't know probably who the Prime Minister is of India, right? Really?
There must be television everywhere.
No.
The smartphone to hoga.
Yeah, some had some phones, but actually completely devoid of that. They live the nature's cycle very much. There are 3-4 months they are totally cut off.
Mm-hmm.
There's only snow. They don't leave the village. They don't come to the plains and all that. They have enough storage spaces to manage those.
This is where Parvati Valley.
Yeah, that valley. That's amazing. Yeah, full with beautiful piece of architecture, and beautiful temples that are lying there vacant. They are not even maintained now properly. But this part of architecture that is evolving parallelly all across the country, without that it claims to be architecture, is certainly dealing with concerns that are very real to me. And I remember in your book on Discovery in Architecture, one of your major pillars was maintenance.
Yes.
Which certainly...
There's a whole section out of 4,
yes.
One section is on
And I
maintenance.
remember for you that has been very important.
Because maintenance to me is renewal.
Yes.
What gives life to the building is what you invest in it.
Yes. And
The
they're very careful about
human energy
Yeah.
which is invested in the building material, in the building fabric, is what gives it life.
Yeah.
Allows it to age.
Yeah.
And that is, to my mind, the maintenance is a bad term because the way it's used generally, but it's renewal. So we talk about...
And I think one should add here, there's something very interesting, especially in regions and areas across the world, where the cycle of maintaining your house is a part of the life cycle.
Of course.
While if you practice as a professional architecture, you are concerned certainly with this life cycle doesn't exist. You are doing a business transaction. So I found it also very interesting because Anna Heringer in the Unplugged talk said something very beautiful, that the European paradigm today rejects this because they see a threat in it.
Mm-hmm.
They see a threat when people start getting evolved in their own life cycle, the building life cycle, producing their own homes, which they can do it because on one hand you have tools available in the market there, all these large shops and go down, but they have all kinds of materials available. First, do it yourself, and people do it. But the mainstream rejects it because it would crack into the market. It will crack into the formal market, it will jeopardize the entire economy system. So we can expand this idea of the formal architecture to be the threat, actually the real threat, and it is threatened by the informal architecture. So to validate itself, certainly it creates an intellectual framework. It creates actually a cage around it.
A policing system.
A policing system, right. Like the government does that
Yes.
by filtering out things. Architects have done that also. They have filtered out the entire life.
Professional people.
Professional people have done it. And we are on a kind of linear track there. And certainly the linear track will not have what you are saying, all the coordinates, because that's threatful. But what they will do, they will amalgamate the global, universal order, which is, certainly we know that, you rightly said that, I feel, which is governed by the European paradigm. They will foster that line. And the architects, the urban architects in India will follow that. And they will follow for the rest of their lives. I don't think there would be a question ever raised. Though,
Well, some are questioning.
yes, though there is this emerging, I feel that. Like yourself, like your neighbor probably. The neighbor has also done some it's little ethnic, no? What,
Yes.
I mean, after long, I had a look at this wall. I said, why did this person do that to your wall? He's raised a 3-story, some gorilla there along the wall with the mumpty. Have you seen that, what he's done with this wall next to your sloping roof? Next to this wall.
The other.
It's a huge, next to this wall only, your neighbor.
Uh,
There's a huge arrangement of a mumpty, 1 story, 2nd story, and it looks so overwhelming looking.
yeah, over here,
I mean,
behind
for
you.
example, that makes me always think, if I had to build next to you, I would be feeling, first of all, very intimidating. My God, it's
No,
such
you
a
should
beautiful
see the
house.
buildings which are coming up around me.
But you know what, I would
They're
feel,
all
my
going
God,
like
this
that.
is such a beautiful house. I will come to Ashish and tell him, guide me, how do I relate to your neighbor, to me? How do I relate to my neighbor? That brings me actually back to this unbuilt and built. I think the idea, at least in the built, is always to negotiate. You negotiate, you meet across, you meet your friend, your neighbor. In the city, certainly there are larger bodies, then it becomes bigger and bigger. So you feed yourself with what the other is saying. You engage yourself in a dialogue. You engage yourself in understanding different perspectives or different aspects of life. While now you got a neighbor who is rejected actually the aspect.
Yeah, but you know, Verendra, this is nothing to do with architecture. What my neighbor is doing. It is simply real estate.
No, not this guy.
Yes.
This guy has done a butch, what do you call that? Cobble, beautiful brickwork.
No, you mean the brick house?
Yeah, the brick house.
But they have not done a mumpty and all that, are they?
You missed out to see that. It's a huge mumpty there.
No.
And huge, I'm not saying even the little cute thing. Yeah. And what is nice, my neighbor can look at
No,
something.
but it's on the other side of the house. Huh? It's not next to me.
Next to the lotus pond.
No.
You can walk
It's a
there.
double-story construction.
And then the mumpty.
There's no mumpty. What they have is they've got a, because I can see it from the first floor more clearly.
What is that third floor?
It is not a third floor, it is their split unit compressor. There are 2 compressors over there. And they've covered them with a very
There's a
fragile steel structure and a plastic
But the
sheet
wall
on it.
is completely there with plaster. The mumpty has a plaster. Or that tower. It's like a tower.
Not really. We must see it.
Yeah,
I
you
don't.
have to
I
see.
see every day that house because from my bathroom window, I look over this roof and I look at their house. You know.
Seriously, you're seeing far ahead. Somewhere, I don't know where. Very far. No, I feel there is.
Now, I think
see,
I thought you were talking about this house over here behind.
No.
All the other houses coming up. You see, they're all making 4 and 5 story houses
yes, they rent it out.
now. Little rat holes which they rent or sell or whatever.
Yes.
Rent most likely.
There's the income now. See,
Yes.
everybody desires to rest and have
It's
income.
simply real estate.
Yeah.
It is not nothing to do with architecture at all.
In this
You know, it's just marketing. You know,
Yeah.
marketeering actually, not even
Yeah.
marketing. It's marketeering, to put it properly. So that is the.
So I think the architects in the cities need an advice if there's somebody who needs an advice rather than
Yes.
the people in the villages.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
I think they are very clever because for them, a rupee spent means very carefully working around that.
Yes, but there is a bit of transfer going on from one of my younger proteges who was working in the office a few years ago, and then she was working on some of my projects in the mountains in Dharamshala actually.
Yeah.
So, and then that project came to some kind of stop, delay or something. So she left. She wanted to do something else, and after some time she managed to get a job. She was very keen on working. She was very much looking forward to being the project architect for the next stage of my work, which would actually be construction. She worked on the design with me, but for construction didn't happen, it got delayed. So she got a job with, that tall foreign architect in Bombay, I won't say his name, Robert something.
Robert Verendra.
And his wife.
Yeah.
They hired her. They were building some kind of resort or some
I know
thing
that, a
in
house.
Uttarakhand or a house.
Yeah, I know that.
And they hired her.
Yeah, Sintali. Yes.
To go to the site and actually sit there, because she was prepared to do that. Most architects are not. They couldn't probably get anybody. But anyway, whether they could or not, she got this job. And she went and sat there for a few months. She was, of course, extremely disenchanted with what she was asking, what the architecture, and which is a different subject altogether. But and subsequently, she managed to. She also wanted to. She went and worked with Anna Haringer for one semester or one course she did with her.
Aarti, right?
Aarti.
Yeah.
So then she got a scholarship, very good scholarship in a German university.
Yeah.
Which one was it? Stuttgart maybe or something. It's not a very well-known university, but they gave her a wonderful scholarship. Everything paid. Travel back, forth for 3 years or 2 years, whatever, to do a master's in sustainable development or sustainable urbanization or something like that. You add sustainable to any word and it becomes, good currency. So she took that obviously, and she went to it. Now she's back in touch with me and she's asking me to help her with her thesis, with her first dissertation or something, in which she is looking at indigenous architecture. And she's looking at the transfer of ideas and between the city and the village, because she's talking about things like that. So there is in fact, and she's looking at number of written works, and there are a number of things going on around the world where people are very carefully looking at what is happening to indigenous architecture or indigenous building practices really, and how can we look at it as architecture. So this is a very interesting development, if you like.
Yeah.
And possibly it was always there. There were rather few people who were doing it. Now I think more and more people are having to do it, because you see these younger architects, they are so dissatisfied with what they're finding in the architectural offices.
Very true.
They are so...
In fact, I'm very sure that most of the architects who are practicing today the monstrosity of architecture that you see, are themselves very dissatisfied.
Must be.
I mean, you can't be blind towards what we are all creating. I mean, it is not about that the builder gets to do mass housing. I mean, Bombay is full, Delhi, all cities are full of it. Whoever the architects are, they're underpaid, whatever architects who do quick jobs there. And but on the other side, I mean, it's a mass housing. On the other side, the selected works in this country that have been designed by architects only differ fundamentally in the arrangement of the elevations and certain things that are value addition for the buyer.
Yes.
But fundamentally,
features, add-on features. Huh?
Yeah, but fundamentally, there's no change. It's, I mean, I'm sometimes I wanted to ask also. There's some young architect from Austria. This guy is very interesting, and he's building less, but he's doing a lot of unbuilt material, producing a lot of unbuilt material. And it's an Austrian guy. What is his name? He came to Delhi also for a lecture. Chris Presht.
They have picked up in different parts of the country, from Nagaland to somewhere in the mountains, somewhere there, to desert here, all over the country they've picked up. There are not that many, so 7 or 8 were there.
Yeah.
But they're building up a library of social design. They're calling it social design, for I suppose want of a better term, but it's to do with, to me that is real architecture. It's to do with the reality of what exists around people, and it's fresh in the way that they are dealing with the ideas,
Yeah.
you know, and therefore it appears that it will have much more meaning to the people that it's being done for. Yeah, something by Sameer Padora was also there. He's done a project, or his office, along with 1 or 2 others, and they have done a library which is in some forested area. Yeah, with very tall roofs rising up so that the trees can actually be part of the building, you know, and the roofs are like that.
Yeah,
so the
that's
rain-
in Mumbai.
Chetawan.
Yeah,
Chetawan.
Chetawan.
Yeah. So the of course the photographs were very attractive,
Yeah.
and it looked like a very interesting. As an experience, I don't know what it is. It was nice. It was very nice.
Buddhist experience.
Yeah. He
So,
has put that across.
so that was also in their library. Plus other projects, very interesting projects. Now, this I found to be a very heartening and very hopeful thing which is happening, you know. And it's really the unbuilt and the built are really coming very close to each other, in the sense that a certain value frame is being put into the building, which can only happen if, and this is obviously happening by people who have spent a lot of time not being able to build, you know, working with ideas which they have not been able to bring into result. Possibly, I think this is maybe it's something which is spontaneous. It's
You
very-
know, I think this picture here that you have on the wall with the craftsman using his body to carve something, maybe Sameep, and I know that because I'm doing a project with him right now, this museum project with this loony. This loony is actually now taken over by Sameep. I've given the project to him.
Okay.
I'm now an advisor to the client,
Okay.
and I advised him to take Sameep to do the work
Okay.
because it was getting too temperamental for me. He's just, I can't handle him. While Sameep, I think the way he functions as a person as well, probably as an organization, he can switch off and switch on.
Really?
Yeah, he can say it's 5:30 and I can only attend up to 5:30. I can't extend that now. I mean, he's very sharp, which is very good for handling a person like that. I mean, that's his
Essential.
skill to operate with a client and understand it.
That's how you can build up an organization,
Yes.
a professional organization.
Exactly.
Otherwise,
And
you can't.
Therefore, I feel some of the finest work that in India architects have been able to do comes out of a intelligence which I feel is not limited to the mind. I think this person represents a body intelligence, and it happens sometimes, like the project of Sameep in that it's an industrial area. It's very close to production of steel gadgets like tanks and all that.
Really?
Wreckage. It's quite a disturbed area. In fact, some of his finest works are actually abutted by or in a context of a very disturbed area. What I feel with him, and I think that counts for all architects, I guess yourself also, is not only that the idea is a product of the mind and put down in a sketch, but that the idea is also infused, filled with the intelligence of the body. So if you go to a site, which is your new context with so many trees, your body may map something that the mind just doesn't recognize. So I think very often, therefore, I value the absorption by the senses. I know it is maybe one dimension, one part of the entire working as an architect, but as a body, you recognize so many things that the mind doesn't do. And for example, if I feel comfortable, if I enter here into this space, I sit in a particular way. Now, it may be good with the Vastu. I have no idea. But the body reacts certainly. I don't think that I have to sit here. If I would think, I would say, oh, that sofa, it looks comfortable. It's actually comfortable. It's a vantage point. I'd rather sit there. But I guess the body is drawn towards certain decisions. Where it comes, we call it intuition very often. Intuition is, of course, an experience gained over many, many times and stored in the body. Like the craftsman who repeats this act becomes, one could say, is intuitive about his decisions.
It becomes a ritual.
It's a ritual, yes. So I think migrating into that field is probably for our context where we have a cultural probability of many rituals. We live our life filled with rituals, which the Western paradigm doesn't offer anymore, because they have, like they say, the God is dead. You know? Actually, with God is dead, they killed actually everything. They took the reins completely, and I think that's the period where the mind takes over. I mean, you have Descartes.
Mind, you're talking about intelligence.
Intelligence, intellect.
Not the mind.
Not the mind.
Because
Yeah,
if you read the work of a Cambridge Don
Yeah.
called Rupert Sheldrake,
Yeah.
he talks about the fact that the mind is not the brain.
Very interesting.
Okay.
And what is it?
Well, it's everything.
Everything.
Yeah. No, it's, you read Sheldrake's work. Do you read a lot or something?
No.
But Rupert Sheldrake
No, I've done. I mean,
is
go
very
on.
interesting. He developed an idea when he was in India, like many others.
Yeah.
Mr. Alexander was in India, did some of his early work, and developed his ideas here. This chap also worked 7 years in Hyderabad at the Crop Research Institute. You know. He's a biochemist, actually, I think, originally, and he has developed a wonderful idea which he calls morphic resonance.
Oh, it's a recent
Morphic
development.
resonance.
Wow.
And he talks about the fact that memory, he thinks memory is not in your brain.
Yeah.
Memory is everywhere.
Yeah.
And you have this resonance that for a particular situation you draw upon the universal memory into your mind,
Yeah.
into your brain, and use it through the brain for doing something. I have not read enough of him, but he's given some very fascinating lectures which are available on YouTube or something. So, but Sheldrake is worth looking at. And he's talking about, when you talk about the difference between the mind and the brain,
Yeah.
or intelligence and the brain,
Yeah.
or intelligence and the mind,
Yeah.
you see, there is a difference. And what you're talking about, Descartes and the whole Western tradition
Yeah.
of the Enlightenment,
Yeah.
is actually about intelligence.
Yeah.
It's not about the mind. And it was in recent times, as there was more and more research into whatever it's called,
Sciences.
neuroscience, that the brain became a feature. And now they're talking about the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain. And there's another very interesting scholar in UK. He lives in Scotland, I think, right in the Hebrides, or some very remote part of Scotland. But he was at Oxford. He was a fellow of All Souls, and he has written about the brain and the right and the left side and all that. It's very, very good. And he's also given some very, very interesting lectures which are available on YouTube. But I'm very unhappy with this division of the brain into right and left.
But the latest is they've discovered a spot here in the center.
Well, obviously.
Yeah. And that they can't explain. In the center. My brother is a neuroradiologist. And they work a lot with the latest development of understanding of the brain. It's a non-invasive medicine, so they don't open the skull to look into it, which is traditionally
You
the
do
way
it,
to
you
understand.
do it by magnetic resonance, no?
Yeah, you do that, and
MRIs and all that.
yes,
no?
you do mostly through that, and then of course they work a lot with stents and all.
Mm.
But they discovered this central point has a shape of. Do you know the cobra has a strange? Shiva's
money,
cobra has
the
this-
money.
What is it called the money?
The money
The
is the mark on the head of the cobra.
yeah, that resembles it
Mm.
strangely, but they don't know.
It's supposed to be in the case of the cobra, it's supposed to be a very valuable stone, or element, mineral, very, very valuable mineral. So, but nobody can get it. I don't know.
I don't know enough about it, but I read years ago about the money in Law. So they've actually now focusing on that.
Yes,
One-
the left and right brain seems to be already kind of past
I think
in a
so.
way, because and partly also because you mentioned last time, about the Buddhist teaching that are migrating slowly into the American universities, that they have opened now some courses.
No, there is something called the Mind and Life Institute,
Yeah.
which was set up by His Holiness, along with a lot of important scientists, American scientists, American and European, and it's stationed somewhere. It's a thing, and they're doing a lot of research into how the brain transforms with things like meditational practices, and apart from other things. This is also one of their areas of research. And they've got, now, you see, the Western intellectual tradition has a lot of faith, to use that term, in reason, in evidence, empirical evidence. So they want, things to be, there should be evidence of what you're doing, which is then verifiable,
Yes.
you see. So that is something, so therefore, it's not enough. Everybody knows that with the meditational practices which are there in, not Buddhism, the Buddhists learn from us, from the Indians after all. The Dalai Lama himself says, he says we were like monkeys in the mountains. Yeah. This is said to, I've been when he said that. And then the Indian masters came and they taught us Buddhism. So he says that. He says our Guru is from India, whereas your Guru is from Tibet, because he calls our Guru is sitting in Kailash. You see? He says your Guru is sitting in Kailash. So that's in Tibet. But that's sort of a little joke. But he's this thing about what was I saying
About the mind, the reasoning, the idea of evidence and reasoning, evidence, and then the basis of empirical.
we all know that meditational practices actually change the nature of our brain.
Of course.
Okay? But there is the empirical evidence of it. Now these people are gathering that. At the Mind and Life Institute also, they are. So there must be many places, I suppose, in the world where they're trying to do this. I don't know. There must be in Russia also, and because we don't know about that. But this Mind and Life Institute I know about because His Holiness is.
Because there is a very strange aspects that comes, which may be not with our religion or philosophy is in tune. And in Europe it is more in tune. That philosophy and politics come together. So for them, the idea of democracy is only sustainable if you bring a evidence that can be shared. For them, it is very important to legitimize a phenomenon by large number of people. I think that weaves through in their way they live their lives. They use the tools. The real world, the world in which they live, has to be shared by each and every person. So this aspect, which I feel is the aspect of having everybody be a part of that development, is not represented in this country. In this country, it is like you take the opportunity, you go deeper into meditation yourself, you acquire it, but you acquire it actually not to transform directly through this kind of exposure to the larger crowd and giving them, that piece of advice or piece of revelation and expect them to transform. But you ask them rather to go a path on their own to be transformed. So there is a difference between, I think, Indian, and I understand that also, the entire spirituality, yoga, and maybe it has to do also then with architecture, because it influences that everybody has to take his or her own path.
you know what it is? It's the difference between projecting outwards and projecting inwards.
Yeah.
Now, for instance, a great saint like Raman Maharishi, he didn't used to speak. Finally,
Yeah.
people used to go and go near him, and they would say that they are transformed. He didn't have to say anything. So this idea that whatever meditational practices, etc., you do,
Yeah.
spiritual practices, they can transform you to the extent that you become almost somebody who is radiating something.
Yeah.
And everybody can do that.
Yeah.
So everybody can. So it's the you do share with others,
Yeah.
but the method of sharing is totally internal as opposed to external.
Yeah.
So I find more and more because I'm working with Europeans a lot at the moment. In terms of this new course that we're developing, the Building Beauty course.
Yeah.
And well, we're doing it, meaning it's developing all the time. And I'm struck by this very difficult to explain to Europeans, the importance of going inwards. And that there is a whole set of relationships, there are patterns, there are ways of doing things, processes, which are associated with going inwards. But we don't know about them. All we know is about the patterns associated with going outwards, with projecting
Yeah.
outwards. And the best example to me was, when you remember when we were doing this Buddha Ganju,
Yeah.
and were you there? There was a site
Yeah.
visit when
Yes, yes.
the Rama came to the site.
To that one,
You weren't there at that time, perhaps, because we were doing the embankment around the thing.
Yes.
And we had decided in the office that the 5 colors of the Kal Chakramandal, the 5 elements,
The orbits around the
the
center.
five elements which
Yeah.
were going to be put as 5 color bands on the embankment, they are there. Earth, water, fire, wind and space.
Yeah.
These 5 elements were represented by colors which are there in the Kal Chakramandal. You see the different colors for these elements are there mentioned. So those colors we are putting on this embankment. And we just about started to doing that, to putting the first layer. And of course what we were doing was that we were starting at the bottom. We have this low embankment, you remember?
Yeah.
And it's at the bottom. And we started with earth. And we were going to, open like that. Earth, water,
Yeah.
fire, wind and space.
Yeah.
And we asked His Holiness, this is what we're doing, we explained to him. He said, what are you doing? This is all wrong.
Yeah.
It's the reverse.
Yes, it's a reverse.
Because at the center is the Buddha.
Yeah.
So you start with earth, and as you get towards the center, to the smaller, to the inner circle, that is when it becomes more and more subtle.
Yeah.
And so we immediately managed to turn around. And so now it starts with earth on the top, yellow,
Yeah.
then it's white, water, then it's red, fire, then it's green, which is wind,
Yeah.
and then it's black, which is space. And so the most subtle is pointing to the inside, not the outside. But we are so used to just projecting
Yeah.
that it never occurred that you could also be, what are you projecting towards? You're always projecting towards outside.
Yeah.
Now everybody wants to go and take refuge in planets outside the planet,
Yeah.
the earth, because we managed to destroy the earth. Now people are trying to make their home in planets outside the earth. But this inner journey,
Yeah.
people don't know how to do it. I mean, we do. People meditate, people work with